What is up? This is Moby, again, your MC slash host for the Creator Stage, powered by Libsyn at Podcast Movement Virtual. Our next session is going to be something that I'm super excited about. It is called Getting Started in Podcasting Simply and Affordably Without Sounding Cheap. And for that particular session, I want to invite to the stage our two speakers today, John Lynch and Soren Peterson. How's it going?
Going great. Thanks so much for having me. What's up, Podcast Movement?
Of course. But John is joining us,
There we
and
go.
boom,
Here it
the
is.
stage is all yours.
Thank you, Moby. Great to be here, and great to be here with Soren, because this has been an issue that's always been important to me. It's something about producing material, but if you want to do a podcast and you can't afford to do it, what's the point? Because the point is, let's get your content out there. Let's make it workable. And you don't have to be spending a fortune. Now, at a company like ours at BSW, if you want to spend a little bit more, we're fine with that. But, let's get you started at a level that you can handle and at a level that's going to sound good. The point is, you put out a podcast, you want to eliminate as many variables as you can. If you put out poor audio, that's going to cut down on your listenership, period. You put out good audio, that's going to keep an audience longer. And that's the point. But do you have to spend thousands of dollars to do that? No, you don't. That's what we're talking about here. And Shure, as you can see right here, Shure is one of those companies that has been producing microphones for decades. One of the great companies, iconic ones. In fact, one of the favorite microphones in this genre and in broadcast where I came from, the SM7, iconic microphone. It's terrific, but can be a little bit on the pricey side, Soren. So that's why the MV7, which has just been debuted, fits so well into the podcast world. Let's pick it up from there.
Yeah, that's a great tee up. So, like you said, the SM7 is kind of that aspirational thing, right? I grew up loving it. Before podcasts were kind of a thing. I'm a musician. I'm a studio rat, and has a long storied history in music studios. Fast forward to today, it's we're very lucky that a ton of very influential podcasters have been using it because of a couple things, right? It's got that great sort of classic radio sound, like John was referencing, but it also is what I call room agnostic. It doesn't really, you don't have to be in a soundproof studio. Now that will always help. But when you go down the path of buying perhaps a USB condenser, and we'll talk about dynamic microphones in a minute, it's very typical for someone to get a USB condenser home and then learn what the room sounds like, right? You do your podcast, you're really excited about it, but you hear the traffic outside or your HVAC system or your whatever. Dynamic microphones are—
Don't forget about the lawnmower during the
or the
spring
lawnmowers, of course.
Or in the wintertime in certain climates, the snowblower.
That's right. Not here. We don't podcast outside in Chicago in the winter. It's metal grills. They'll stick to your, that.
There you go. Right.
So yeah, the dynamic microphones matter a lot. The room matters less to the dynamic microphone, right? So you can kind of invest in a room in your home and get a really nice condenser and build out some soundproofing and or stick your head in a blanket fort like I see online all the time to keep your room sound out. Or you can just get a dynamic microphone and you're 95% of the way better from that specific aspect.
One thing that we do with the MV7 that takes care of two issues. Now, in my case, it's connected by way of an XLR cable into a mixer. In your case, it's by the USB interface directly into a computer. Either way, you can do this. And with the MV7, it sounds great either way. Because, sometimes we have microphones that are USB only, and they don't have necessarily the greatest sound quality compared to a Pro XLR microphone. But in this case, you've got both.
It's both. That's right. USB is amazing for the simplicity, right? Like you take the MV7 out of the box, you plug it in, and there's no special drivers needed. It's just up and running. You just select it, and you're good. I'm using a feature of the MV7 called auto level mode, which is doing all the processing for it. So if I set this up from scratch, I would plug it in, I would press one button on a piece of free software, and that's the sound that you're hearing. It's not because I work at Shure or have any audio knowledge. This is just plug and play, hit a button and go. That's literally what the MV7 is meant for.
To a lot of people, particularly me, plug and play. Sometimes people say that's my middle name, but the point is that let's make it simple. Make it quality, make it sound good, but simplify things so the podcaster can focus on what they're there for.
That's right.
The content.
The content, the podcast in the first place, right? So the MV7 is sort of best of both worlds, where it can grow with you, right? You get that convenience of the USB output right away, combined with what we call voice isolation technology, which is our name for the acoustic network. And it sure has a long history in dynamic microphones, so we know a thing or two about how to make a dynamic microphone good, and we purpose built this for use at home. So you get that great tone no matter where you are. If you're XLR or USB, you're up and running really quickly. But as you expand maybe into a multi-channel podcast, or if you want to feature a guest or something like that, then you're usually calling up John at BSW and getting an interface, right? A multi-channel thing. In which case your USB microphone is no longer useful for you. So the MV7 allows you to grow because it has the Micro B and the XLR at the same time. So you can, when you get that interface, you can then keep using your microphone. Your tone doesn't change, and just use it in your Pro 2-channel setup there. So it's kind of just meant to be a great utility tool as well as a really, really just great sounding microphone wherever you are.
Now, I want to point out, we're accepting questions. We'll have time for some of your questions after, so go ahead and enter them on the podcast tab as soon as you can, and we'll get to as many of those as possible, because the whole idea here is to share with you different tips that you can affordably, without sounding cheap, produce your own audio podcast. Now, what a lot of people have done in podcasting, and it works fine. It's a good way to start. If they don't go this direction, you can find an affordable USB interface and go with a classic, a microphone called a Shure SM58. And you ask any singer on the planet, you'll probably be hard pressed to find one that has not used an SM58 somewhere along the line. Broadcasting too, it's just been an iconic microphone for many decades. It works great. It lasts. It's hard also to find one that isn't dented a little bit, because they do get worked on, but hey, they keep going. They keep sounding great. SM58 is a way to start if you're not in a position to start with the MV7.
That's right. SM58 is great because you touched on they rarely die. They're sort of famously bulletproof, right? You might dent a grill or something. You probably will. It's actually part of the design. Little known fact there. You might even dent the grill, but you're a $5 grill away from a brand new microphone that will measure perfectly to spec. So what it matters in the 58 can survive pretty much anything. So there's a ton of them out there that are used, and you can get them pretty affordably. So if you get a nice 2-channel interface in your price range and get a couple of SM58s, it's a killer 2-channel setup. If you podcast on the move or in a different place all the time, something like a portable 2-channel recorder and 2 handheld SM58s is a really great sort of, podcasting kit on the go. I see that on the podcast movement pages all the time, into a Zoom H4 or insert other 2-channel recorder here. So yeah, definitely can't forget about the SM58. It's a wonderful entry-level tool in podcast. It's a wonderful mid-level tool in podcast, and it's a wonderful high-level tool in broadcast and music stages around the world for a long, long time. So it's a legend for sure.
We have had them in my entire career at BSW. Of course, that's only 28 years. I think the SM58's been out double that or something like that,
Yeah,
but it's just been around for
66
ever, and something of that nature, but it's just an iconic microphone that works. That's the point. It works. You don't have to start with a big expenditure. I have had in my career with BSW, and a lot of people getting into podcasts or starting internet radio stations or whatever. My first goal is make sure you haven't gone bankrupt before you start making any money at it. So don't get into too much gear, let's just make it work but be expandable. That's the beauty. Now, in that case of like what Soren's has, he has his microphone set up on USB. I have mine set up on an XLR connection, and it's going into another popular piece of gear for podcasters, the Rodecaster Pro Mixer. Well, if you're in a position to do that and you can put several of these together, great. But if you can't financially, it's not an issue. You can still make things work a lot more affordably without getting into too much debt right off the bat. So you can, again, instead of having the pressure of having to make the next credit card payment or whatever, concentrate on what you do, your content. That's what people want to know about. And a reminder, go ahead and send us questions. We'll get to them as soon as possible. But when people are looking at going whether or not it's going to be a USB microphone or a dynamic, one of the things that I've always looked at, you always touched on it, but I want to touch on it again. A USB microphone, while it does a fine job, you're locked into that. That's
Right.
all it can do. It's
Right.
not going into anything else. And if you need to expand, okay, now that's where the dynamics really fit in, because they can go USB or they can go XLR into a mixer like the Rodecaster Pro. You've got more flexibility to grow down the road without obsoleting something that you started with.
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to sort of figure in that like sunk cost of your one channel USB microphone. If you buy that and decide to expand or upgrade, then that's just going to live in your closet for a while, or you put it on Craigslist or something. This is a bit more money up front, but you don't have to get rid of it until you're ready for your SM58 when you start monetizing. You know what I mean? I'm sorry, SM7B is what I meant. So
But
yeah,
at this level, you really don't need to upgrade to an SM7. This is a
especially
similar
not
sound
when
to
you're
it.
starting, especially when you're starting. That's literally exactly what this thing is built for. Is everybody loves the SM7 for a really great reason. It's just expensive, right? We're here to talk about doing it on a budget. So like SM7's $400 plus. You have to get some inline gain boosters or a nice mixer or a preamp. So total cost of ownership ends up pretty significant for a dipping your toe in, or even if you're taking it seriously, it's a good chunk of money.
One of
Getting
the
the
things you've
interface.
done with the
Yeah.
MV7 is you've got a headphone port right on the MV7. So, hey, a microphone, a headphone, you're on. There you
That's
go.
right. There you go. Yeah, I can hear both. I get a real-time monitor about myself, and I get, of course, what's coming back from the other side. And there's a slider in our app, which is again a free piece of software that lets you blend between those, so you can get nice and comfortable in your headphones. And yeah, it's sort of a one-stop shop, right? It's a podcast studio in a box. You can expand with it if you want, but you start right out of the box as a pretty darn good sounding podcast, if we may say so ourselves. But if you're starting in a 2-channel world, finding a couple of SM58s and a 2-channel interface, of which there are many really great ones these days, that's a fantastically affordable way of doing it. My other great point about podcasts and why you can do it on a starter budget is you don't need the $2,000 MacBook Pro. You know what I mean? Like you don't need all the crazy computer tools that I do in my music studio because I'm running a bunch of tracks. Like, not that podcast productions don't get big, they just don't have that really intense processing power needed. So you probably have a computer at your house that can handle that wasn't built for performance, right? Like you can get free pieces of software and do it. So really where you spend your money up front is your front end, your microphones and your interfaces. If it's a 1-channel, this is a great place to start. If it's a 2-channel, grab a 2-channel interface and a couple of individual microphones. And you're off and running, man. That's all you need. You don't have to buy lenses for your camera or learn how to edit video if that's not what your podcast is. Like, it's just a really great way. I totally understand why so many people do it. And MV7 should be a great help for a lot of those folks. And, give people a way to get in that SM7 world without having to spend a ton of money, because it is an expensive thing to get into that tier.
Let's also talk about just the application of getting started in a podcast, because could be a number of our viewers here might not be used to doing this, might not be used to recording. Give you a tip. I don't care what voice you think is outstanding. Could be a singer, could be an announcer, I have my own favorites. I guarantee you this. None of them like the sound of their own voice when they hear it coming back at them.
That is true.
Because we sound different coming through headphones or from speakers than we do from internal. So I don't care. You pick a voice, James Earl Jones. I bet you he doesn't care for the sound of his voice. We all get, and who doesn't like that sound, but we all get used to it as performers. So get over that in a hurry. And the best way to learn how to execute a podcast is very simple.
Podcast.
Turn on the microphone and do it.
That's right.
There's no book. There's no anything. There's some tips and things like that we're talking about. But for actually delivering on your content, nothing beats opening up that microphone and putting yourself on the line.
Do it with the intent of throwing it away. Like like a new band, when they form, they should probably throw away their first song because they haven't found themselves yet. That takes some time. And so a couple key gear purchases up front can, like you were saying, John, kind of you know, take the pressure off of, will it sound good and do I have the right stuff? Just figure out your content, find your niche, and, you know, do your thing. That's the beauty of podcasting, is let's just put your voice out there. So just a couple key pieces of gear get you on your way. Really, really high quality, even if you're just getting started, you know.
And you cannot practice too much, but there are certain things you want to do. You want to sound natural. You don't want to sound like you're trying to do Ted Knight on the Mary Tyler Moore show or something like that. You're just be yourself. Whatever it is, that's what you want to do to carry across. That makes you more listenable. And that's part of the issue for podcasters is it's got to be something, not just compelling content, but they want to be able to want to listen to who they're talking with. And so the better the audio performance is when you're using something like what we're talking about here, not at an expensive price, but at an affordable price. But when it's more listenable, you're going to keep more of the audience. Like back in my day when I was on radio in another century, we didn't have much competition when there were a couple of other radio stations in town. So when we're doing remotes or something like that, and they sound like they're on a telephone or a cell phone, because they were, it didn't matter. That's what we had. But today you've got a bazillion different sources that people can go for content. If your audio isn't up to snuff, they're going to go away, or the majority of them, except for the ones that really want to get the content that you have. So it's like comparing, like I always used to say on a high school football broadcast, you're always going to have the parents and the booster club. It's the rest of the audience you want to keep. And the better the audio quality is, the more of that additional audience, which is larger, will you be able to keep. And that's why we talk about not spending a lot of money, but getting a lot out of the money that you spend, so that podcast has a very good sound. And then don't worry about the tools. Once you're set up, practice enough so you can concentrate and focus on the content and not on how you're going to do it.
Absolutely. And I'd say experiment. You know, try to find a place in your house that makes sense. Half of that is comfort. If that means it's, you know, on your coffee table in your pajamas with a cup of coffee, and that gets you in your creative space, then that's awesome. If that means in your basement, in your soundproof room that you've built, and that's your studio, that's awesome. But, you know, experiment, do a couple that you plan on throwing away. Just talk. There's plenty to talk about in the world today, right? Like, just turn the mic on and start talking. It doesn't have to be, here's my polished 5-paragraph book report. Like, just vomit some words out there, and then, you know, record it and play around with editing them. And you'll start to forget that you're talking into a microphone, and you'll start to figure out how you want your podcast to be. And it just starts by doing it. I couldn't agree more, John.
My other tip is always record it. Don't do a practice, record it. You might nail it the first time. And a lot of times you do. So that, and comes across more natural when you do that. So always record it. You like it, boom. Don't try to make it too professional or whatever. This is a conversation. When you're interviewing somebody else, oh, I didn't like where I got a little in there, a little this or that. Yeah. Then you start editing out all this stuff, and then it sounds kind of disjointed. You still want it to be a natural kind of a thing. Also, we want to remind you about questions. We're going to start taking them here in just a moment. So anything you have, we're going to get to as many as we can in a short period of time. But keeping the idea here of let's get your podcast effort started affordably and go from there. And dynamic microphones, one of the big things that helps you is, as Soren mentioned, you don't have to worry so much about the room and soundproofing and things of that nature, because that can get pretty pricey.
Yeah, that's where your money is, right? Like, build a room in your house for podcasting. That's a lot more expensive than a couple $100 for a microphone, you know?
Exactly. So, Bobby, let's check in and see how are we doing from a question standpoint. Let's see if we can answer some of those for the listeners and viewers on our podcast, and we'll go from there.
Sounds good. Let us do that. I know the SM58s are road warriors. I'm considering purchasing a secondhand SM7B. Are they also super durable? Anything I should watch out for?
In my 13 years at Shure, I've seen one broken SM7 come back from the field. Literally one. The SM58, you can, if you take it apart and you twist the wires, that's really the only way you can break it. The SM7 is a absolute tank. I mean, it is much, much larger, just kind of side by side here. You know, it's got this all metal cage underneath the, like, this thing will damage you if it
Oh,
falls
now
on
you
your
look
toe.
like you're on Northern Exposure. There you go.
Yeah, right. So yeah, absolutely nothing to worry about. If it's a great way to buy SM7Bs. It's not that much cheaper than buying them new these days, because they're very popular at the moment. But use SM7Bs are great. You have nothing to worry about. It'll work just fine. Recommend just getting a new grill just for just for cleanliness and sanitation purposes, but also just because a new grill or a new windscreen rather will be like your out of box experience. So nothing on the microphone will wear or damage. That thing is a tank.
A tank. I like that. Lee asks, how does this mic compare to the SM58 SM7B?
It's a great question. It is not the SM7B. That's pretty much the first question we get when we talk about this thing. The SM7 sound wise is known for its big low end, right? It's got that like movie voiceover radio broadcast type of thing. The MV7 is a bit more mid forward. It doesn't have that huge low end to it. It just plain doesn't get there. It's kind of built for clarity. And the trade-off, what it does better than SM7 is it has a hotter output. So you don't need those boosters, those really expensive preamps to give the SM7 the 60 or 70 dB of gain, which is a ton that it requires. So MV7 is, when you're using the XLR, is about 10 dB hotter if you're up close. So you need significantly less gain on it. So yeah, sound wise, it is not the SM7. The SM7 it's a legend for a reason, and the size of it is actually directly related to that low end response. So MV7 is about 3/4 size, has a bit less low end to it, but is built to be, and SM7 also has what we call an extended frequency response, with more low end, more high end, kind of freakish detail for a dynamic microphone. And that's why it competes with all those high end condensers in the music world. So MV7 kind of takes the vibe of it, where it doesn't care what room it's in, and we want to get you that, like, it's still a very rich broadcasty type of sound, right? But it doesn't require the crazy gain. It's just an easier to use one that's built more for speech, where the SM7 is definitely going to have a wider, richer, more high fidelity sound, and is much better on instruments and everywhere else the SM7B lives really well in.
And can this be directly connected to a DSLR?
That's a good question. If that DSLR has an XLR input of some sort, or you can adapt it to it, then yeah. Otherwise, I'm not aware of any way to connect it via USB. But the XLR connection on the back of the microphone is always on, as in is a passive, just regular XLR microphone. It doesn't need power or anything. So if your camera has an XLR input, or you're feeding a mixer that fixes that, absolutely, it's a great choice for that.
Or if a camera has more of what we call a mini plug jack in there, like a 1.18 or 3.5 millimeter, there's a simple XLR to mini plug adapter cable.
Yeah.
Goes right in there, put it on the end of your XLR, and you're good to go into that too.
Nice. What mics do you all have? John, I see you, is that a SM7B? Soren, what's behind you?
Oh, on my shoulder here. So this is our MV7 box. This is a microphone called the MV88 Plus Video Kit. It's another line from our Motive family. It's more mobile friendly. It comes with some accessories where you literally just clamp your phone into it and connect a cable, and there's a piece of software that lets you configure the microphone however you want. So it's more for like the mobile photography type of stuff, but it's a really cool podcast on the go product. And up there, that's a special edition Elvis microphone, the Super 55 it's called. 55. We did an all black one a couple years ago that I really like. Then I have my 50th anniversary from a couple years ago SM58, and my trusty SM7.
I like it.
And a bunch
more. Spent a lot of time
studio.
in the sports world and still do. So I have a number of different headset models, which I could use in podcasting, but this MV7 makes things so convenient right there.
I like that. Outside of the actual equipment, what is your number one tip for podcasters when it comes to audio quality, making sure it sounds good? John, you were like, yes, the content matters, but if your audio isn't good, most people will not be engaged. So outside of equipment, what's the one thing they have to just really keep in mind?
Well, microphone technique does help. The only way you can improve on that is for the practice. So you need to know you have to work with a particular microphone, knowing whether it's going to work better for you this way or going to work better for you this way. You find the sweet spot. And I understand something else too. There is absolutely no perfect microphone for everybody. There's a lot of perfect microphones, but what works best for me may not work best for you, Moby, and may not work best for Soren. So you go with a good quality choice, but maybe over time you find when you get a chance to try others that maybe a different model actually works better on your particular voice. I did a test with one guy where we did 3 microphones. One of them was the SM7. The others were 2 other competitive models in studio broadcasting. And we did this test a long time ago. And he liked what he was on one microphone. He liked what I was doing on another microphone. He liked both of us on the SM7. So you never know. But, you know, you start with something good. When we're talking about the perfect mic for your voice, the differences become that much. Not a big thing. Get something of quality. Even if it doesn't have to be a big price tag, but be something of quality, and then learn how to use it where that mic going to work best, whether you're here or someplace else, what works best for you, and practice and record every time, because you'll hit it more often than not.
That's right. And you'll, I love the idea of practicing with your microphone technique, right? Like the more, even just turning your head, like this is more of a singer example that I'm going to give, but a lot of people go up a stage and then they go, hey, I'm singing. Hey, what's going on? And they just literally turn their head off the microphone. And after a while, you start learning to pivot around the microphone. So you go, hey, what's up over there, guitar player? What's up, bass player? As opposed to, hey, you know what I mean? So you just like even when I find myself listening to music with this thing, I end up creeping towards it, just because I'm very used to having a microphone in my face now. But yeah, get used to it. The SM58 can be a bit much if you're right on it. This is going to be too thin. There's, you know, a nice little sweet spot right here. And it doesn't have to be a perfect 3-finger static. This is how I talk. Don't be tense while you do your podcast. And that's what John means by practice. Just record yourself, you know, record yourself, edit yourself, find out what you don't like, become aware of it.
Absolutely. John, Soren, thank you so much for teaching us about audio quality and the techniques that we need. For everybody watching, this is the Creator Stage at Podcast Movement Virtual.
Baby, turn out the light.